the one I was most concerned about, of course, was the online harms bill, which is a much bigger threat to free speech. Now, because the government has been prorogued while this leadership thing plays out, and who knows what will happen. I assume there's going to be an election at some point in the near
hope.
So at the moment, that legislation has died on the order paper, but there is a process, I understand, by which bills that are partway along can kind of come back at the stage where they were left off. I don't know whether consent is required. I don't know the answer to that, but in any event, the fact that they would even contemplate such a draconian piece of legislation, and that it got as far down the pipeline as it did, suggests to me that it could come back. I mean, whether it's the Liberals that bring it back, I sure hope not the Conservatives, but we have to be absolutely vigilant, because I think part of the problem is, and I think we saw this during COVID too, and this is part of the loss of innocence, is that I don't know that Canadians, even many of them, really care or understand why it's important to have freedom of speech or other fundamental freedoms. There just seems to be this collectivist mentality that has formed over the last couple of decades, and a lot of people seem to be on board with the idea that you should be able to shut down someone else's speech or cancel their talk, or mob them online, or report them to somebody, right? And of course, we've seen this throughout history. People informed on their neighbors and maybe even their family during communist times and with the Stasi in East Germany. So there's something weird about human nature, and I guess maybe I didn't always appreciate that, how easily that could kind of wash over a society. And so I kind of worry that, even if that bill is gone, it's probably coming back, because I think there's popular support for it. People don't appreciate that yet we have the society that we have, the successful society that we have had all these last number of decades since the Second World War, because we have a liberal democratic system. We have those kinds of fundamental freedoms that people need to be able to engage properly in democracy, and to understand arguments on both sides, and to not become absolute serfs. I mean, you're supposed to, if you can hear all the information that's out there and you can make informed decisions, then you can't be under the jackboot the same way as you could in historical times and in other countries around the world. But I don't think people appreciate that. And as a result, we're going to sleepwalk into some sort of a horrible totalitarian nightmare, I think. I really worry about that.
I worry about that too. And I agree with you in terms of your concern that it just seems like a lot of Canadians really don't care about freedom of expression and, their rights in general, freedom in general. And, it's hard to shake people out of that, because I think that a lot of people think, well, yeah, hate speech is bad. I often hear this, and actually we just heard this from the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. This was at the WEF recently. Yep. He said, we actually do have, he was responding, I think, to a comment by Elon Musk. We actually do have free speech in Europe. And then he says, except if the speech is supporting extreme right positions. And it's not true that they have free speech in Germany in general. I think he said free speech in Europe and in Germany. And in Germany, the law prohibits speech that could incite hatred or that's deemed insulting. I think the law prohibits the spread of malicious gossip, violent threats, fake quotes, reposting lies online can be a crime. I mean, this line, I support free speech, except, racist speech, or except, speech from Nazis or white supremacist speech or extremist speech, or what he said here, far right speech supporting, far right ideas or ideology. It's so crazy to me. It just doesn't parse.
No, and as soon as you say but, or except for, I mean, you don't have free speech anymore. Now, you can argue about whether it should be an absolutist, whether you should be absolutist about it. And I think even the United States isn't entirely absolutist about it. The hate speech or at least incitement to violence, I suppose, is certainly a restriction, and probably a reasonable one, right? But when you start getting into those subjective words, harm is a big one, obviously. I mean, who defines harm? And we see right now, just in the last decade, how society has gone with the most expansive definition possible. And I think it can maybe it's not fully realized yet. I think probably they could expand it even further. It's subjective, and it's in the eye of the beholder, and it's political too. So, the German chancellor doesn't want to have the ADF come up from behind and take over society. Well, you know what? There's a lot of ordinary people who agree with the platform of the ADF, and that is not necessarily extremist. If it's not extremist, if half the population thinks that it's something that they would want to vote for. Yeah. So anyway, they don't have free speech, and I think JD Vance was right to call them out on it. But I think that seems to be the societal trend. And I want to kind of come back and tell you a little bit more about the Free Speech Union, in the sense of, one thing that we are going to, I think, be able to do a little differently than some of the other civil liberties organizations is collaborate with our sister organizations in other countries and help each other and help new countries joining us to fight the censorship in their countries as well, and also kind of look for those global threats, because it feels like all of this is happening in lockstep in some form or another around all of the, not just Anglosphere, but the sort of historical Western world, right? Mm-hmm. So Germany is a mess this way, but so is Belgium and the Netherlands and France, and the UK is just frightening at the moment. Australia and New Zealand have their issues. We have chapters now in Switzerland and South Africa as well as New Zealand and Austria and in the UK and Canada now. But we're going to have to expand. And we've just actually recently hired somebody, a former diplomat actually, to head up what's been incorporated as the Free Speech Union International. So we can start perhaps making some submissions at, different supranational bodies, just getting another perspective out there. And it may be that it doesn't achieve anything. It may be futile. But on the other hand, if you don't get the point across, if you don't fight, if you don't stand up and defend the liberal value of freedom of speech, then I just think the steamroller of censorship just continues to mow you down. And so you have to do something. And that's one of the things that we'll be able to do with our collective efforts.